TLDR, I'm not going back in the closet, baby, and I do not think most of you should either. Hey, what's up, y'all? This is Jacob. Welcome back to Sunday Yap Session, the show where every Sunday I hop on here and yap at you all about something with some sort of cohesive through line to carry us all through, and sometimes we do better than others. I didn't have any canned drinks because the person who did my Aldi's pickup, they didn't have any of the drinks that I wanted. So we're doing, I think this is like guava punch from Aldi in a cup today. Something a little opaque, a little ASMR moment, little bit outside of the normal, which is good. This is going to be an outside of the normal video, so very fitting. So last video I talked about how I had some new content kind of in the works and how video essays were something I wanted to branch into. Today is not going to be a video essay per se, but I did want to kind of touch on some of the points that I'm going to bring up in an eventual video essay where I want to talk about coming out culture, the history of coming out, just kind of the whole conversation of coming out. And I feel like I need to just hop into this now and talk about some of my thoughts and findings now, because in the wake of the upcoming second Trump presidency, I'm seeing a lot of conversations about should we go back in the closet, should we pull back from publicly queer life, so on and so forth. And I have a lot of thoughts about that, and they kind of tie into what I would be talking about in that video essay. So this is going to be somewhere the kind of crux of a video essay in a Yap session, much more research informed than most of my Yap sessions, but this is not a full-on written scripted video essay. So let me know what y'all think about this if you like this kind of hybrid format. But yeah, I've been seeing a lot of conversations on TikTok amongst like the LGBTQ, the queer community, whatever you want to call it, about how we are going to prepare for this upcoming second Trump presidency, which for a lot of people, myself included in a lot of ways, it feels like it's shaping up to be something that is going to be much scarier than the first Trump presidency. It seems like Trump and the team he has formed seem much more cohesive, and obviously he's had one run at this already, so I think there's going to be a little bit more like intensity, a little bit more political pressure, and a little more like understandable fear from the LGBTQ community, with our rights being threatened, with our livelihoods being threatened, and with just people with extremist mindsets and bigotry being emboldened by the second Trump presidency. I do want to give a very big disclaimer though. I am very specifically going to be talking about like sexuality in this. I think if you are someone who is trans or gender nonconforming, two-spirit, so on and so forth, I think this is a completely different conversation, and I think what you choose to do with your life is going to be very, very different from just like a sexuality-based approach to how these next 4 years are gonna go. And I mean, I'm non-binary, but I am not like a binary trans person. Like, I'm not gonna speak for their lived experiences. That is a conversation that needs to be had within the trans community, and I'm not gonna try to step on any toes there. Also, if you don't agree, or if you feel that like your life experience is different and you already kind of know what you want to do in regards to how these next years are going to go out, totally cool. This is not me telling you to do anything. I am not going to pretend like I know any of y'all's lives better than you know your own. I'm just sharing my own thoughts and opinions from a history and research informed perspective and how I'm going to be moving forward for the next 4 years. So with those disclaimers out of the way, let's get into the video. So I guess for starters, I'll start a little bit about kind of my perspective, my coming out story, a little bit of my background. I'm not going to go into my full coming out story. If you want to hear that, I've made a video about it. It'll be linked somewhere up here. But just in general, I came out pretty early in life in the grand scheme of things. So I've been living and being publicly out since I was 18 years old, when I was still in high school, which is wild to think that that's almost a decade ago now. Time flies by so fast. Since then, I've kind of navigated a couple of different identities, and it took me a little bit to kind of find my footing of where I feel very solidly and very complete now. And I call myself gay just as like shorthand because I feel like that's a lot easier. But very solidly, I would identify as a queer non-binary person, and I feel like that is the most like succinct and accurate take of my gender and sexuality. Even before I came out, I was not someone who was like afraid or shy about like being feminine. Most of my friends were girls. I would like dress like in feminine clothing. It was not giving like mask for mask alpha male vibes. Like, it was giving very fruity. But as I've gotten older and become more comfortable with my identities and who I am, I have become more and more visibly queer. And that is something I am very proud of, and I am very like happy to do. Being visibly queer for me, and especially like, I have to give context to, I don't know if I said this at the beginning, I'm in Oklahoma too. So like, if it's bad for anyone, it's probably going to be bad for me. Granted, I'm in like one of the more liberal areas, so like it's not as bad as like people living in like super rural communities. But I was doing this back when I lived in my little rural town too. So like, it's not like I'm a stranger to like worries or being scared about how I'm perceived and what's going to come of that. But just for me, like, it's not really been a huge deal. And so yeah, just for like my overall, just like what I want to do, I have no desire to go back into the closet. I don't care how bad it gets. Like, I will not be like living stealth, not interested in doing that, will not be doing that. It's gonna take something horrible to happen for me to ever like step back from where I am in my life now. But also, I see myself being publicly out as part of queer liberation, and I think this has a lot of historical context, and I kind of want to get into that. So a lot of my understanding in history about kind of the era of the queer liberation movement in like the 50s, 60s, and 70s is largely informed by the book Stonewall by Martin Duberman, I believe is the name of the author. If you are not someone who has like read up on your queer history, I would largely encourage you to read that book. And I'll put some other readings as well, because this is not the only book that I've kind of read, but this is one that has a lot of really good concrete information and follows a lot of the key people that were involved in the queer liberation movement. Or I guess specifically the gay liberation movement, I will say. We'll cover that nuance in another video. But I feel like it should go without saying, obviously being queer, being gay, whatever, in the 50s, 60s, and 70s was a lot harder than it was now. You were dealing with a lot more like outright public violence, legislation about what gay people could and couldn't do, the spaces they could and couldn't occupy, so on and so forth. A lot of the spaces that gay people were able to be like out and comfortable in were like the bars and club scenes and things like that, and that had like involvement with the mob. It was a lot more of a hostile time in that time. And I'm sure y'all know about Stonewall. That was kind of like, at least in that area of the country, there were other sort of things that were going on around the US in the grand scheme of things at the same time, but this is not a queer history lesson holistically. But Stonewall was kind of like the ignition and kind of the building point for a lot of these things. Before all of that kind of happened though, there were basically these gay organizations that were popping up around the United States, and there were several different ones that were kind of talking about different ways to achieve gay liberation. There were a handful of different avenues about how people wanted to do that. There were some that kind of went in the more like respectability politics reign, where they were like, well, if we just be calm, be normal, and act like basically straight people, not like performing as straight, but like act like you would a straight person, but just be gay, like that will be the key to our liberation. There were people that were more in line with kind of how I feel, where like, we're not going to play the respectability politics game, like we deserve rights and we are entitled to rights like everybody else. But I think largely my perception was that there was, to some degree, this wasn't everybody that was agreeing on this. Like I said, there was a lot of different kind of opposing perspectives, and a lot of people had a lot of different ways about how they wanted to go to this and who was going to be brought with them too. That's an interesting thing we'll cover later. But if not a holistic consensus, there was a consensus among some people that coming out and living publicly gay lives was going to be part of gay liberation. And basically the thought process for that was gay people, queer people, and I'm going to use gay and queer interchangeably in this context, but it is not one and the same, especially thinking about this historical context, because a lot of these liberation spaces were largely like gay men and they were kind of excluding everybody else. So it was truly like largely just the gay community. There were lesbian communities that were also organizing and having similar sort of conversations and things like that, but largely they were like excluded from these larger gay groups. Like I said, we'll cover this all in a future video essay because it is messy and there's a lot of drama. But gay people, queer people as a whole, largely in this time and still now, are kind of viewed as this like group that if you are straight, if you are not involved in that kind of community, is kind of just like this entity that exists. And a lot of people, they have like hostility towards us, don't like the way we live our lives, think we're disgusting, think we're living sinful lifestyles. And it is so much easier to hate this kind of like amorphous blob of people that you don't really know and have any sort of connection to. And that's a lot of why there was so much brutality around this time. It was, there's this community that is living like a degenerate lifestyle, and so therefore we're gonna oppress them and exclude them. And what a lot of these people in these gay liberation spaces argued was potential for us to have so much more social political power if we are living publicly out lives, because then if you are in community with people that are not in this community, it goes from this is this large group of people that we don't know anything about and we're kind of lumping all together to, oh, well, like my brother's gay, my sister's gay, my cousin's gay, so on and so forth. And it was kind of seen as this strategy to like build familiarity with larger cis straight society, and also like hopefully to kind of ease people's minds and kind of change people's minds based on their personal experiences with individuals. And I think this is something you'll see pretty frequently in people's coming out stories. And this was something that was very true from my experience. I think a lot of my family was pretty negative in their feelings about gay community, thinking it was a sin, so on and so forth. And maybe they do still think that, but when I came out and it was like, oh, okay, well, my kid is gay, suddenly the conversation changes. And not that this happens every time. I know that there are some people, a lot of people that get like kicked out of their homes, things like that, and it does not end up being the situation. But a significant amount of the time, it really changes people's entire context. And that was kind of the goal, was trying to encourage people like, yes, you need to come out, you need to live your life publicly. People just need to see us. People need to see that this is not just like some fringe little group off in the corner. These are people that you are interacting with in your day-to-day lives. Some of them may be playing the respectability politics games and are just like you and are quote unquote normal. Some of them might be wilding out. It might be, very flamboyant, very fruity, and having a great time. And like, that is great too. And that's how I feel very much so about my public queer life now. That's how I feel about the content I make online. That's how I feel just about how I walk around and navigate my life in general. I feel that it is very, very, very important for me to be very, very, very publicly queer and to not shrink or minimize or hide myself from public life, because people need to see people like me. Both people that are like in cis straight society might be homophobic, so on and so forth, or just might be like neutral. I don't even think it needs to be necessarily with like homophobic people. But then also for people who were like me when I was like younger, who was like in the closet and didn't know anybody like me, like from a Black queer experience specifically, didn't see a lot of people like me in the media, so on and so forth. I think that representation angle is really, really important as well. People like us that are happy, living productive lives, not like being sad, tragic struggle stories like a lot of the like gay representation that we've seen in like earlier media. And honestly, up until like very recently in the grand scheme of things in like media history, even in like movies and stuff like that, like most queer trans characters were either like getting beat up, getting killed, getting beat up and then killed, or were like trashy sex workers. That was like pretty much all of the media representation. And this is not me shading sex workers. I want to make that very clear. Love my SWs down. But if you look at like media representation of like gay people in history, like that was basically all you could be. Being very publicly about like my queer life now is important for those reasons as well. And so I think the thought process around that time and that context of when things were bad back in like the 60s and 70s is kind of what informs how I feel about now. I don't think it's going to get as bad as it used to be back in that time. I think we are going to regress to some degree. I hope it is not by much. We're going to see how things play out, but I think like, especially just looking at politics over the last like 4 to 8 years, it has become very, 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 especially targeted at the trans community, scarily easy for people to be very public in their hatred about our communities. And I think that like Trump being in president is going to embolden that again. So I think we are going to see some steps back, but I don't think it's going to regress like as far as I think a lot of people are kind of like making it out to be. I think a lot of people are just understandably very scared, and I think that is coming with some sort of catastrophizing, which I understand, but I do not think is ultimately helpful in the grand scheme of things. And I also don't think it's super helpful to be thinking about these things and like doing them in preparedness for this change. I think there is a large conversation to be had about basically like falling in line before things have actually like gotten bad. Like I said at the beginning, it's gonna take a huge, huge, huge negative experience for me to go back into the closet again. And maybe we'll see that. Maybe that will happen, and maybe I will eat my words in the next like 4 years or something like that. I truly don't think that's gonna happen, but I'll be the first to admit I was wrong if and when that does happen. But I don't think there is a lot of utility in like preemptively complying, essentially. Like, oh, I think this is going to happen, therefore I am going to step back. I'm going to go back into the closet and minimize my life. I don't think that's going to be ultimately helpful. And I think that's largely what these people want. I think that's what these like super conservative, hateful lawmakers want, is for us to just basically fade into an existence. And if they don't have to do anything to do it, if just like the imminent threat of them doing something to us is enough for us to like go into hiding, I think they will be tickled and happy and delighted with that. So that's part of it too. Like, I am not going to just like preemptively comply to something before it even happens. And like, God forbid something actually really, really bad happens. I think honestly, kind of in the same vein I was talking about before, I think that's going to be important as well. Like if something really bad starts happening to like the LGBTQ community and they start like rounding people up or something, I think similarly to how like people maybe would not care if it was just some kind of like ambiguous group of people, like, oh, I don't know them, so on and so forth. If it's like people's kids, if it's people's cousins, family members, brothers, sisters, so on and so forth, I hope and I would be optimistic that I think at least a little bit more people would probably be more inclined to care and like actually do things about this, rather than it being like, okay, well, we're all like hidden in the closet and like nobody knows that we're gay and so on and so forth. So like I said, anyone, you do whatever you think is personally best for you. I do not think that, especially if you are living like a publicly queer life now, I do not think it is time for you to go back into the closet. I do not think you need to preemptively go back into the closet. I think largely too at this point, I think this is kind of like interesting too, especially in the super digital age that we're in now. I feel like a lot of our like digital footprints would clock us anyway. Like even if I like went back into the closet completely and was like, I'm a straight cis man, it's like, see, even that felt goofy. Like I do not think I could do it. My digital footprint would clock me. They'd be like, is this you? Is this you at these pride parades, so on and so forth? So like I don't even know if that's like a feasible option for like a lot of people too. So like I don't know. I don't know. And I think too, like lastly, especially just being out for as long as I am now, it is like such a relief, like not having to like sneak around and pretend to be something I'm not. Like I think we're all in different ways, regardless of like gender, sexuality, so on and so forth, occupying different aspects and different identities of ourselves and where we're at. Like who I am with my friends is not who I am at work, and is not who I am with my parents, and is not who I am with my partner. Like they are all like fragments of me and aspects of me. But when it comes to like being out in my sexuality and stuff, it was so exhausting, like pretending to be something that I'm not, like skirting around questions when it came to like who I was romantically interested in stuff, skirting around like questions of when I was in a relationship, like changing pronouns, and basically like creating this whole fantasy life that like is not real, and having to do that like on a day-to-day basis. That takes so much mental energy, and it is so draining. And as someone who has not had to do that for a very long time in the grand scheme of things, like I have no interest in doing that again. TLDR, I'm not going back in the closet, baby, and I do not think most of you should either. I think maybe if you have a certain circumstance, you do whatever you want to, but like I do not think it is going to be like that. And I think too, if you're someone who is still in the closet and it is largely for like personal comfort, like if you're someone who's like pretty independent, not dependent on your family for like financial support or anything, and it's largely just a personal preference and comfort thing, you might as well just do it now. With global warming, with Trump in the second presidency, it might all just crash and burn now. So like you might as well get a couple years in of living your Yas Queen life. It's pretty fun. It's a pretty good time being out and living authentically to who I am. So I feel like that's largely what I wanted to talk about today. There's so much more to this conversation, but that's kind of like off the cuff. Like I said, I will do this video essay at some point when I have way more free time than I do right now, because there is so much to this conversation that I want to talk about, and so much history that I want to kind of dig up, especially just the history of like the gay liberation movement. Like y'all, it was messy. The girls were fighting, the gays were being misogynistic, they were not including the dolls very much at all. Like it was messy boots. And just like there's a lot of like infighting in the LGBTQ community about things like respectability politics and how to achieve liberation. It's really interesting, and I'm really excited to make that video. But yeah, that's pretty much all I got today, and I definitely want to know what you all think below too. I'm very curious how you all are thinking about this. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you enjoyed it, like I said at the beginning, please give it a like. That helps me out quite a bit. And if you want to come yap with me every single Sunday, be sure to hit that subscribe button, because I upload at least once a week, and a lot of times more than once. So come through and enjoy the videos, enjoy the gay vibes. And I will catch you all in the next one.